Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, just a few more hours and it'll be 2024. New Year's is kind of, I think in Japan, probably the most important holiday of the year. It's sort of like Christmas for us. So I guess it's kind of special to be able to give a talk on New Year's Eve. I don't think that opportunity has come up very often. And of course, this time of year, I think we all kind of try to reflect on, the year that is wrapping up and things that we want to do in the following year. Of course, New Year's resolutions are an important thing, and I think they're a good thing. And so, I think one of the things that I'd like us to think about today is, what is it that we can work on in 2024? So, I think about myself, this 2024 will be my 38th year. I kind of used to always be the young one around here, and I'm still one of the younger ones, I guess, but I'm getting to the age where, I don't feel old, but I don't feel young anymore either. And, with a lot of things, you practice them and you get good at them over time, right? But kind of life itself, being a good person, being an adult, you'd think with 38 years of practice, I'd be good at it. But I feel like, it's really difficult to practice effectively for just the sort of the basic stuff of being the person you want to be. I remember I had a soccer coach when I was pretty young, and I somehow remember him saying this, that people say that practice makes perfect, but that's actually incorrect. It's perfect practice that makes perfect. And speaking for myself, although of course I do practice Buddhism, my practice is far from perfect, and I'm sure that's the case for most of us. We kind of try to do our best, but being human is difficult. And it may be for one of the following reasons, and just bear with me here, this is going to be kind of a long list. Abuse, aggression, ambition, anger, arrogance, baseness, blasphemy, calculation, callousness, capriciousness, censoriousness, conceitedness, contempt, cruelty, cursing, debasement, deceit, deception, delusion, derision, desire for fame, alcoholism, discord, disrespect, dissatisfaction, dogmatism, dominance, eagerness for power, insolence, egoism, envy, excessiveness, faithlessness, falseness, furtiveness, gambling, triviality, gluttony, greed for money, holding grudges, hard-heartedness, hatred, haughtiness, high-handedness, hostility, humiliation, hurt, hypocrisy, ignorance, imperiousness, being an impostor, impudence, inattentiveness, indifference, ingratitude, insatiability, insidiousness, intolerance, intransigence, irresponsibility, jealousy, know-it-allism, lacking comprehension, lecherousness, lying, malignancy, manipulation, masochism, mercilessness, negativity, obsession, obstinacy, oppression, ostentatiousness, pessimism, prejudice, presumption, pretense, pride, prodigality, quarrelsomeness, rage, rapacity, ridiculing others, sadism, sarcasm, seducement, excessive self-denial, self-hatred, sexual lust, shamelessness, stinginess, stubbornness, tormenting others, tyranny, unkindness, unruliness, unyieldingness, vanity, vindictiveness, violence, violent temper, voluptuousness, and wrath. I don't know what you can do about voluptuousness unless you're intentionally accentuating it or something, I guess. But this is a highly questionable list of 108 defilements that I found on the internet. If this was on Wikipedia, it would definitely have the citation needed thing. Because I question both some of the translation choices, I guess, if it's being even translated from an original text or where it came from. I have no idea. But nonetheless, we can say that those are 108 possible defilements that one could have. So in Japan on New Year's, one kind of tradition. It's apparently sort of a more recent tradition. I think sometimes people have the impression that it's very old, but it seems to be maybe more new, is that you might go to a Buddhist temple late at night, like around midnight, and they will ring the big bell. There's like a big, usually sizable bell at most temples, 108 times. And it's supposed to represent these 108 defilements. And each kind of time you ring the bell, that's kind of one defilement that you're sort of trying to forswear, that you're repenting and vowing to move beyond. And so this happens in the transition from one year to the next. So it's kind of a nice tradition, I think. There are other ways of kind of coming up with this list of 108. That's a big list, of course, right? So it seems that the more well-supported versions are actually sort of more like calculations of existing lists, like adding them up and multiplying them by each other. So for example, we have 6 senses in the Buddhist understandings. So of course the 5 ones that we normally consider plus consciousness. And if we multiply these by the 3 possible reactions that we can have through our senses, so positive, negative, or indifferent, that makes 18 possible sensations. And then each of these we can either be sort of attached to pleasure through them or detached from pleasure through them. So these are 36 passions, it said. And each of these may be manifested in the past, present, or future. So if we multiply those together, we get 108. So that's another possible way of coming up with a list. This is also the traditional number of beads that are on the big rosary, like Buddhist rosaries. They usually have 108 beads representing these 108 defilements. But I think really, it's just supposed to mean that there are a lot of possible ways to to act in a kind of defiled way. So 108 sort of stands in for a lot. So in Buddhism, this word defilement it comes from the word klesha, which can also be translated in a number of other ways. So sometimes you'll see afflictions, destructive emotions, disturbing emotions, negative emotions. Sometimes you'll just see stuff like troubles or problems or that sort of thing. The Sino-Japanese translation is bonno, so sometimes you'll hear that term too. And the 2 characters that, I was looking them up, and they both sort of just mean like the 2 characters that make up that phrase mean something like sort of trouble or annoyance or something that causes you problems. But interestingly, the first of those 2 characters is, Chinese characters can be made in a couple of different ways. Most of them are like, they have one part that sort of indicates something about the meaning and one part that indicates how it's pronounced or would have been pronounced. But some of them are, pictorial, right? So they're like the character for person famously is like a little stick figure. So that, it's just supposed to be like a picture. And the bon and bonno is a compound ideogram. So it has, on the left side, it has fire, and on the right side, it has a head. So, it's like our head is on fire with these disturbances. And of course, this character predates Buddhism, so it's supposed to more mean like how we feel when we're annoyed by something. But I think that it's kind of interesting. So, of course, part of our practice is, Dogen says separately that we should practice like our head is on fire, but that's not quite the same thing here, and we want to avoid having our head on fire in that way, in the afflicted way. Okay, so a little bit about these kleshas and sort of how this idea has evolved over time. So the ones that we're going to be most familiar with are the 3 poisons. So these come up a lot. And this is, of course, ignorance or delusion, attachment or greed, and then aversion, or sometimes translated as anger. These are the 3 poisons. So it's said that these are kind of the root of all of our problems, essentially. So if we could eliminate these things, we would by definition, have attained nirvana in the traditional system. In the Theravada tradition, they usually refer to these as the 3 unwholesome roots rather than the 3 poisons. And these are then contrasted with the wholesome roots, which I think is a nice way of doing it, because we don't often talk about the sort of 3 antidotes to the 3 poisons. But the 3 wholesome roots then, of course, are, so instead of ignorance, we have wisdom, right? Instead of attachment, we have generosity, so we're not attached to our stuff, we're willing to share it freely. And instead of aversion, we have loving kindness, so we treat others, like they're a part of our family, like they're our own mother. So, interestingly, these 3 don't really appear to be grouped together that often in the sort of early, sutra material. It seems like it was sort of a later, as the Buddhist scholars sort of started compiling all these big lists of things, that's kind of where the 3 poisons seem to have shown up. So, that system of sort of Buddhist philosophy is called the Abhidharma. So they took the sutra material and kind of tried to extract out the kind of philosophical stuff from it. In this Abhidharma system, in addition to the 3 poisons, the Pali version, or so the Theravada version of the Abhidharma, gives 10 defilements. Let's see, do I have those in here? So those are, in addition to, so the first 3 are the 3 poisons, so greed, hate, and delusion in this translation. But then also conceit, wrong views, doubt, torpor, restlessness, shamelessness, and recklessness. So I think some of those weren't on the big list of 108, so which is kind of surprising. So you could definitely have more than 108. And so, let's see. So one instance where we do see this coming up in the sutra material is the Buddha basically saying that any association of what's called desire passion with the body or mind is a defilement of mind. So this is a passage from a Pali Sutra. So monks, any desire passion with regard to the eye is a defilement of the mind. Any desire passion with regard to the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the intellect is a defilement of the mind. When, with regard to these 6 bases, so the 6 sense bases, the defilements of awareness are abandoned, then the mind is inclined to renunciation. The mind fostered by renunciation feels malleable for the direct knowing of those qualities worth realizing. So I think that this is kind of interesting. Hojo-san Todo-san, has talked in the past about, in the Pali canon, this idea of contact, so the contact between the sense bases and the sense objects being sort of the point at which defilement kind of enters. It's a different word used there. So the upadana skandhas, the sort of corrupted skandhas, or kind of, what does upadana mean? I forget. But basically the same idea. And it's interesting that this is kind of a similar parallel to that, right? So it's wherever this desire and passion enter into the way that we use our sense organs, that's where these defilements arise. So it's not that, when Todo-san talked about that system, so the idea is sort of when we get rid of contact, then everything's fine. But it's sort of like, how do we get rid of contact? Like, we're still, presumably the Buddha still was like seeing stuff and hearing stuff. But the idea, of course, is not that you're just becoming totally, insentient, but rather that that contact is no longer characterized by this defiled grasping. So this is essentially, I think, saying the same sort of thing in a different way. And in addition, some of these Theravada philosophical systems point out that defilements are essentially synonymous with craving and desire. So craving, of course, is the fundamental thing that's mentioned in the Four Noble Truths as the cause of our suffering, right? So there, that word is used, the tanha, for craving, but we could just as easily say defilement, klesha, or one of those 108 things. Or also desire, so raga is a different word here. So, let's see. Another instance where this word klesha comes up in the Theravada material is regarding the 12 links of causation. So this is, kind of a complex understanding of why we behave in ways that aren't so awakened. And so the 12 links, it starts with ignorance at the bottom, and then you have formations, so like thoughts that drive you to do something, basically. And then next is consciousness, so the way you see the world. Next is name and form, so this is the nama rupa that we hear about sometimes. In this context, it sort of means like the body and mind, essentially. So it sort of gives rise to this body and mind that we have that has already been defiled by that ignorance back there. And that, of course, contains next the sense bases and then contact with other things, which gives rise to those sensations that can be positive, negative, or neutral, like we saw before. And then that, in turn, gives rise to craving and clinging. And then it said becoming, and then birth, and aging and death, and then it repeats again. So it's sort of like, in a way, kind of a weird system. Like you'd think that birth would be at the beginning, maybe, but it starts with ignorance. But there's a famous Theravada text called the Visuddhimagga, written by Buddhaghosa, who's like a really important figure in Theravada Buddhism. And he kind of, in his commentary, gives this slightly different interpretation of how this list works. So he says you can think of these 12 links in terms of 3 rounds. And the 3 rounds, the first one is the round of defilement. The next one is the round of karma. And then finally, the round of results. So in this system, the first round of defilement is the ignorance. And then the next round of karma, so the sort of, karma that we create from that ignorance is our formation, so the way that we react to sense input, essentially. So when we react negatively to something, that's karma that's already been created there. And then the next is the round of results. So the consciousness, the way our body is, the way our sense bases act in terms of contact with other things, and then subsequent feelings, all of these things are the results of that ignorance affecting our feelings. And then there's another round of defilement, which is the craving and clinging that comes out of that. Another round of karma, so that is becoming. So we change, as a result of how we're shaped by both these defilements and everything else that we encounter. And then finally, another round of results of the birth, aging, death. So in the early system, of course, we exist in the world of samsara because of the fact that we have defilements, right? When we remove our defilements, we cease to be stuck in this world of samsara in the early tradition. So that's why this is a result of being born again and dying again. So the 3 rounds, let's see, and Buddhaghosa in the commentary, where does he have this? So he says, so this wheel of becoming, having a triple round with these 3 rounds, should be understood to spin, revolving again and again forever, for the conditions are not cut off as long as the round of defilements is not cut off. So I like this kind of idea of just like this wheel turning over and over and over and over again, which of course is a common image in our tradition. So elsewhere in this text, the Visuddhimagga, when he's talking about the Four Noble Persons, these are the different kind of stages of awakening. The precursor to the attainment of nirvana is the complete eradication of the defilements that are the root of the round, is the way that he describes nirvana, essentially. So it's cutting off those defilements in the 12 links. So that's a little look at the Theravada kind of philosophical system and how it understands these defilements. Mahayana, as I said, changes things a little bit, and we talk now about 3 poisons rather than the 3 unwholesome roots. And then within the Mahayana school, it has its own Abhidharma system with different lists and different things on them. So, for example, the Abhidharma Kosha, which is a really another important Mahayana text that's kind of a commentary on the Abhidharma system, gives attachment, anger, ignorance, pride, doubt, and wrong view as the 6 root defilements. So the first 3, again, of course, are good old 3 poisons. But then we also have pride, doubt, and wrong view. So doubt is kind of seen as a basis for not becoming involved with wholesome actions. And I think that this is, because sometimes the word like unfaithfulness or something like not having faith is used here, and faith is touted as a good thing. And I think it's very easy for us to get hung up on faith because it has a lot of kind of baggage, I guess, in our society, but that's not really exactly what is meant here. So if we have doubt, if we're refusing to sort of just accept some of the basic teachings, then we can't really progress because we're not jumping in and taking action where we need to take action. And I had dinner with a friend last night, and he was kind of talking about been feeling kind of sad about the state of the world and stuff, and I was kind of trying to probe him a little bit and see if we could come up with ways that might make him happier. And I think at the end of the conversation, it was sort of like clear that he was just spending a lot of time isolated, and I said like, well, a lot of people find meaning in doing things for other people, so maybe finding some way that you can be part of a group and help that group, or to do something good in the community. And he sort of expressed the same kind of doubt, like, yeah, like I know that that's good, but like, will that really do anything because the world is so like bad already, So I think it's that kind of doubt that we want to overcome here when we're talking about that. So it's not that we don't on some level intellectually accept the Buddhist teachings, but really not overthinking it, essentially, just being like, we know that this is a good thing, let's get out there and do it, that kind of doubt. And then this next part, wrong view. So, of course, we have right view as one of the 4 noble truths. But interestingly, the idea of views, I think, in the kind of Buddhist philosophical thinking are interesting, because it's kind of said in some of these commentaries that right view is not so much having the correct opinion. I think that we, in today's political discourse, having the correct opinion is what everyone wants to have, and what everyone shames everyone else for if they don't have it. But these commentaries say that's not really what we're going for here. Actually, we're kind of going beyond views. So it's kind of a detached form of cognition, essentially. But there are also sometimes 5 wrong views that are given that we should specifically try to avoid. One is thinking that the 5 skandhas have a self, that there's some permanent self that arises out of all of the temporary things that make up our body and minds. Second is the extreme views of eternalism and annihilationism. So these are, in Nagarjuna, he's always playing with these two extremes. So eternalism, the idea that nothing ever changes, that everything is permanent and fixed, and then annihilationism, that nothing matters, essentially, that nothing exists, everything is kind of a fake and an illusion. So we need to not hold either of those views. We need to follow the middle way. Third is the view that rejects causality, that assumes that one thing doesn't cause another thing. And going back to doubt, I think that this is an important consideration. We understand intellectually that if we behave in a certain way, it'll have a positive outcome, perhaps, if we do the right thing. And yet we come up with all these ways to distract ourselves from actually doing those things. We almost behave as if causality doesn't work the way that we know it works. So clearly, if we do good things in the world, that will have a positive outcome. And yet we find ways to convince ourselves not to do them. Next, maintaining wrong views as superior to all other views. So having some fixed viewpoint that is not correct in one way or another, and thinking that it's better than the way that everyone else thinks about things. So I think sometimes we see this in the Buddhist Sangha. Sometimes people will kind of bring in these personal pet ideas that they have, and then claim that they're actually the most important thing in our practice when they don't really have much, kind of support from the tradition. So I think we need to be careful about that kind of thing. And then finally, thinking that wrong conduct is conducive to awakening. So this is sort of similar in a way. Thinking that by doing some thing that isn't actually helpful is going to help you in your practice. So those are the 6 root defilements. And of course, there are secondary defilements, but I won't go through all of those. And these can kind of differ, so different schools have different lists. So the Sarvastivada school has 6 defiled factors of wide extent instead of these root kleshas, and they have delusion, heedlessness, lassitude, lack of faith, sloth, and restlessness. So there's some crossover, but some different ones. And then they add to that 10 defiled factors of limited extent. So anger, hypocrisy, selfishness, envy, competition, harmfulness, enmity, trickery, arrogance. So that's just kind of a look at the way that the philosophical Buddhist schools look at these defilements. I think the take-home measure here, or message here, is that I think maybe some of these words for you. Maybe if they weren't just washing over you too much, because I know it was a lot of words, but sometimes when I hear words like this, I'm kind of like, oh, that's one that I've been working on. It's funny. My parents recently moved into a new house for sort of their they're in their 70s now, so it's their kind of final retirement kind of home, and they were trying to get rid of all this stuff, and so my mom gave me all my old report cards, going back to kindergarten, and for me, I feel like one of my biggest defilements is sort of the way that I interact with other people. I can be sometimes very direct, and I don't often consider the way that other people react to what I'm saying, and my attitude is just sort of oh, well, I'm just saying it how it is, so what's wrong with that? But of course, people have emotions and are affected by the things you say, and I don't always consider that. And so my report card from first grade, said needs work on interaction with others. And several of the other ones also sort of made similar notes. So I was like, wow, that is pretty deep-seated. So, and I think that it's helpful to recognize these things, because unless we recognize them, we can't do anything to correct them. And I do feel especially with my practice, I think I have gotten better in that regard. I'm definitely not perfect, but I'm better than I used to be. So hopefully, some of these words, when you hear them, you're like, oh, well, maybe I have a problem with anger. Maybe I should focus on this in 2024. Maybe it's something that I can work on. And of course, all of these things have an antithesis, right? So just like we saw with the unwholesome roots having wholesome roots that counterbalance them, the nature of language is such that most words have an opposite. So we can always work on whatever the opposite of these words are. So if we're angry, we can work on patience and kindness. If we're selfish, we can work on directing our energies outward. If we're harmful, we can work on not harming people, and so on. So that's kind of what I hope that we can take away from today. So moving on from here, though, I just want to touch briefly on what Dogen says about defilements. And so I sort of tried to, this was a little bit, I didn't do this in the best way that I could have, which would have been to look in the original text for the phrase bonno. Instead, what I did was I just sort of searched, the digital version of the English Shobogenzo for like the words that are often used as translations for kleshas, which don't always necessarily line up with the actual word klesha, so some of these might not be totally right. I did check some of them, but I just wanted to sort of see where these came up in Dogen's writing. And interestingly, he doesn't seem to talk too much about defilements, at least using that phrase. So the first example I have here, which is a little bit long, comes from Hotsu Podaishin, which is the mind of awakening, right? So, and this is a section at the end, and one of the things that you'll notice when you read the Shobogenzo is often the sort of second half. Dogen sort of goes on a rant a little bit that's much easier to understand, where he's just sort of saying, like today these monks all are doing bad stuff, and it's sort of less poetic and more just sort of like a diatribe. So that's where this phrase seemed to come up most, the sort of end of chapters of the Shobogenzo. So here he's kind of talking. The topic is guarding the mind of awakening. How do we keep our mind of awakening active and consistent through our practice, rather than sort of getting really excited, arousing the mind of awakening, but then kind of having it peter out. So he says, idly craving the 5 desires. So the 5 desires are sometimes property, sexual greed, food and drink, fame, and sleep. So idly craving the 5 desires of the present, practitioners lose the virtue for future attainment of awakening. Sometimes, in order to hinder a practitioner, celestial demons and the like will take on the shape of a Buddha, or will appear in the shape of a parent, a teacher, or relatives, gods, and so on. Thus, drawing near, they concoct fictions and prevail upon the bodhisattva, saying, "The Buddha's truth is far distant. You would suffer long hardships and experience the deepest sorrow. The better course is to resolve our own life and death first, and then deliver living beings." The practitioner, hearing these tales, regresses from the Bodhi mind and regresses in the conduct of a bodhisattva. Remember, talk such as the above is just the talk of demons. Bodhisattvas must recognize it and must not follow it. Just never regress or stray from your conduct, and vow to deliver others before attaining deliverance yourself. So this is all pretty straightforward. The idea here is that, the fundamental kind of characteristic of Mahayana practice is that it has to be outwardly directed. It's not just about this being here, because we're intimately interconnected. So it's a mistaken view to think that, we can just kind of fix this one body and mind here without, working to do the same more broadly. So he says, know this as the talk of non-Buddhists, and know it as the talk of bad companions. Never follow it at all. And then he just chunks in this big quotation from a text called the Daichido Ron, which is a commentary on, in the last talk that I gave about the Heart Sutra, I was saying that the original text of the Heart Sutra seems to be extracted from this 25,000 line Prajnaparamita Sutra. So this text is a commentary on that text. And it's very important in East Asian Buddhism. And Dogen quotes it a fair amount. So this says here, there are 4 kinds of demons. The first is demons of hindrance, so demons of defilement, kleshas, so hindrance is the word here. The second is demons of the 5 aggregates. The third is demons of death, and the fourth is celestial demons. Demons of hindrance, of what are called the 108 hindrances and so on, discriminate 84,000 miscellaneous hindrances. So it mentions this list of 108, but then also says that there are actually 84,000 miscellaneous hindrances, so I could have gone on a lot longer. Demons of the 5 aggregates are the primary and cooperating causes which combine to produce hindrances. We've got this body of the 4 elements, together with the matter made from the 4 elements of matter sensed through the eyes and other organs, and this is called the aggregate of form. The sum of feelings, such as those of the 108 hindrances, is called the aggregate of sensation. So it's interesting that this 108 defilements, they're often associated specifically with the skandha of sensation, so that like kind of first moment when we encounter something and it's positive, negative, or neutral before we've even like conceived of what it is exactly before we put a name on it or like decided what we want to do about it. It's that kind of first moment of contact. Through the occurrence of pleasure and displeasure, there can arise habits which accommodate or do not accommodate mental states such as greed, anger, and so on. This is called the aggregate of formation. So this is farther down the list when you kind of decide what you want to do about it. Combination of the 6 senses and their 6 objects gives rise to the 6 kinds of consciousness. The countless and limitless states of mind, which are the differentiation and synthesis of these 6 kinds of consciousness, are called the aggregate of consciousness. So he's just sort of saying, basically going through the 5 aggregates and, saying that they can all be affected by these defilements. The next, I'll kind of skip, but the demons of death, celestial demons. And then at the end it says, Mara is an Indian word. In China it is called a being which is able to steal life. Only demons of death can actually steal life, but the others are also able to produce the direct and cooperating causes of the taking of life. Moreover, they take away the life of wisdom. For this reason, we call them killers. Someone asks, one category, the demons of the 4 aggregates, covers the other 3 kinds of demons. Why do you separate them and explain the 4? The answer is as follows. In fact, it is one demon, but for the purpose of analysis, there are the 4. So Indian commentaries are often like this. They're kind of funny to read. So, you can divide these things up any way you want, but I think it's maybe more helpful to just focus on sort of the easier to remember single root issues. So I think that's why we talk so much about the 3 poisons, the 3 poisonous minds, because they really encapsulate all these other things. So then that was all a quotation. So in the closing, Dogen says, the foregoing is the teaching of the ancestral master Nagarjuna. So that commentary is attributed to Nagarjuna. Most scholars don't think he actually wrote it, but practitioners should know it and should diligently learn it. Never idly be worried by demons into regressing or straying from the Bodhi mind. This is to guard the Bodhi mind. So, essentially we need to stay focused on what we're trying to do. Every time, we hear, and this again, goes back to doubt and faith, right? So what he's talking about are these gnawing ideas of doubt that come into our mind, like, I should just focus on myself. This is really too hard, whatever it might be. All of these things are trying to pull us away from the path, but, we need to ignore the demons and move forward. Okay, a different take that is more in line, I think, with Dogen's style. I said here, it's removing hindrances as a hindrance. So in kuge, which is flowers in the sky or flowers of emptiness, and kuge, this term refers to cataracts in your eyes. So in Chinese, it's like, you have little flowers floating in front of your field of view. So that was the original meaning of this term, but Dogen takes it because the first character means emptiness, and the second character means flower, so reinterpreted it on that basis. So in this text, he quotes a poem, and I won't quote the whole thing, but one of the lines is, by eliminating hindrances, by eliminating defilements, kleshas, we redouble the disease. And then he provides a little commentary. He says, we have not been free of disease hitherto. We have had the Buddha bug and the patriarch bug. This is Nishijima's translation. I kind of like the Buddha bug and the patriarch bug. So we're kind of infected with those things. We're hindered by the Buddha and the patriarch, which is a good thing. So Dogen often does this, right, where he takes some negative term and turns it into a positive one. Intellectual excluding now adds to the disease and augments the disease. So by getting fixated on what is a defilement and what isn't, and like, are you being good or bad, like this dualistic way of approaching the world can itself become a hindrance, right? So he's not saying, to hell with like worrying about hindrances, like do whatever bad thing you want to do. What instead he's saying is you can't be kind of fixated on these things. So the very moment of eliminating is inevitably hindrance. So this is same kind of thing. If we're so fixated on eliminating things, that is itself a hindrance. They are simultaneous and are beyond simultaneousness. So very, very Dogen-esque phrase here. So both of these things happen together, the eliminating of a hindrance and that thing being a hindrance itself. They're both simultaneous and beyond simultaneousness. And then he says, hindrances always include the fact of eliminating them. And I think here, this is sort of similar to the notion of practice and awakening being one. So it's not that we have attained the Buddha's final awakening when we sit zazen, but awakening is already there in that moment that we're sitting, right? So in the same way, I think when we sort of recognize these hindrances and have this aspiration to improve ourselves and to help those around us improve, the fact of eliminating is kind of already there. We've kind of, in a way, in that moment, already gone beyond them, but we need to do that moment by moment. Okay. So, the next, how am I doing on time? I didn't get the clock.
58.
Okay. I'll try to wrap up here. The next section that I have is from Shizen Biku, which is not one that we talk about a whole lot, but Shizen Biku, so Shizen means the fourth dhyana. So in kind of traditional Buddhist practice, it's said that there are four like sort of states of concentration that you can reach in meditation, and the fourth dhyana is sort of the highest, where you're like very single-pointedly focused. And so in this fascicle, the Shobogenzo, Dogen it tells the story of this monk who attains the fourth dhyana and assumes that he has attained awakening. Because there are also four like stages of the Four Noble People that I mentioned before. So he sort of equates the dhyanas with these four levels of attaining nirvana. But then as he's dying, I can't remember, there's some being that comes to him that only comes to ignorant people. And he's like, oh crap, like I guess I'm not actually awakened. And so it's kind of a parable on thinking you're right when you're not, right? And one of the things that this text deals with is there was a debate in East Asia about Buddhism's relationship to Taoism and Confucianism. And some people were of the opinion that Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism are all like perfectly compatible with one another, and we can say they're sort of like one thing. Dogen really did not like this view, and that's one of the things that he points out here. So he like quotes things that Confucius and other like and what Taoist people like Chuang-Tzu say, and he has not very nice things to say about these quotations that he quotes. So in this section that I'll read here, it's not actually a quotation, it's, I think, just sort of like made up thing that someone might say. So he says here, there are those that say mountains, rivers, and the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the four illusions. So the four illusions are seeing impermanence as permanence, seeing suffering as pleasure, seeing impurity as purity, and seeing no self as self. Those are the four illusions. The four illusions and the three poisons are all what the Tathagata preached. To see the mountains and rivers is to see the Tathagata. The three poisons and the four illusions are nothing other than the Buddha Dharma. To see atoms is the same as seeing the world of Dharma, and every instant is the state of Sambodhi. This is called the Great Liberation. This is called the directly transmitted and immediately accessible truth of the patriarchs, of the ancestors. So that's the quotation. So Dogen is setting this putative person up to fail, of course. So, fellows who speak like this are as common as rice, flax, bamboo, and reeds. The government and the people are full of them. It is not clear, however, whose descendants these fellows are. So in contrast to the Taoists and Confucianists that he was talking about earlier, he's like, I don't know where these people came from, but it's not clear whose descendants these fellows are, and they do not know the truth of the Buddhist ancestors at all. While mountains, rivers, and the earth may be what the Buddhas preach, it is not impossible for mountains, rivers, and the earth momentarily to be what the common man sees. So Dogen writes a lot about, he has a fascicle, the Shobogen, so the Ascension to preach the Dharma. He has the Mountains and Waters Sutra, the sound of valley streams and the color of mountains. So all of these texts sort of point out that, seen correctly, everything in the universe is kind of preaching the Dharma because it is just there in thusness. But what he says here is like, yeah, like a common person can like see a mountain, but that doesn't mean he's like taking the lesson of what it's preaching him, It may enter his field of view, but that's not the same thing as actualizing the teaching. So those fellows, however, do not learn and do not hear the principle of what constitutes the preaching of Buddhas through mountains and streams and so forth. For them to say that seeing atoms is the same as seeing the world of Dharma is like subjects saying they are the same as a king. So here, this again too, is atoms is in the sense of just like physical stuff, and of course it's physical stuff that makes up the world of Dharma. But again, it's unless we see it as such, it doesn't really matter. So, moreover, why do they not say that seeing the world of Dharma is the same as seeing atoms? So he does a nice little Dogen-style thing here, where he likes to reorder phrases. So form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, but actually form is form and emptiness is emptiness. So it's this style thing that he's doing here. So he's kind of saying, well, they didn't really write it in such a way that they're emphasizing that they really understand what this means, which for him would be having it in all these different deconstructed ways. If the view of these fellows could be esteemed as the great truth of the Buddhist ancestors, the Buddhas need not have appeared in the world. The ancestral master need not have manifested himself, and living beings would not be able to attain the truth. So if it was that simple, if we just didn't have to do anything, and just say, yeah, defilements, they're a manifestation of the Buddha's teaching, and that's fine, we don't need to practice, why would the Buddha have even needed to teach anything? So this is, of course, kind of very similar to Dogen's kind of root question that we talk a lot about in our practice. So he wanted to understand why we needed to practice. And, his answer, of course, is sort of that even though nirvana is kind of imminent out there in the world, we still need to manifest it through practice. And so this person that he's criticizing has not manifested the practice, even though they recognized its imminence out in the world. Okay, I think I will wrap it up there. But again, take-home message here. Think about, something that you need to work on. I think we all have something that we can come up with. Maybe you've already made some kind of resolution for 2024, and that's fine. But maybe if you haven't already, try to think about it in a Buddhist context. How can we bring about a world that's more wholesome, even if that's on a very local level, yourself, your family, your friends, your workplace? How can we help other people? How can we bring our practice outside of just kind of something maybe that's more grounded in selfishness and make it more about being out in the world? I think that this is a good time to reflect on that, to make some real vows, and to stick to them, not get caught up with doubt. And as we say in our tradition, it's a practice of vow and repentance. So we don't have to be perfect, but we should recognize when we've gone astray and remind ourselves why we made the vow that we made and try to get back on track. 2024, I'm sure, will be a challenging year. It's another election year, and we've got 2 great candidates. So I'm sure that'll be fun for a lot of people. There's a lot of problems in the world, but we can't let that get the best of us. Why would we? All we can do is kind of go forward and do our best in this world of desire. So, any kind of questions or comments?
As always. First, would you remind me the source of the list that included rejecting causality that you mentioned? I know you said where it came from, and I kind of didn't. I'm asking because rejecting causality is something I have to be looking into at the moment, so I'm interested in where you're. I asked you to look back in your
no problem.
in your text. I know you said
the 5 wrong views.
Yeah.
And this is from, I believe, the sort of Yogacara tradition. I don't have a text.
Okay.
But
okay. Maybe that's
possibly the Abhidharma Kosha, which is
I was
Yogacara.
interested in how old rejecting causality is,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a major theme
Yeah.
all the way through Soto Zen. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that just kind of I was reminded of as you were talking about Bondo, I think that term has a underlying feeling of seductiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something in the derivation of that. I remember giving a talk on it once, and I always thought that's really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so easy to say here, I'm going to give up the 3 poisons. I'm going to give up restlessness and lassitude,
Mm-hmm.
and then, right? Why is it difficult? Why do we have vow and repentance? It's because of the seductiveness of that.
Yeah.
Even though here we know that's, I should stop doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, we get sucked back in. And I just think that's an interesting element of that whole thing. I think on the one hand, we need to sincerely make the vow, and on the other hand, we can't beat ourselves up if we have to do that more than once.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is why, as you say, vow and repentance is important, because those things are so sticky.
Yes.
They're just so seductive. And even when you're doing pastoral care with your friend, he identified, here's some things I aspire to do, and yet. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other side of that is just so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like that short-term gratification is so attractive. There's a reason these things are so deep-seated. I mean, you went back to kindergarten. Right? There's just a reason they're so deep-seated, is they're so sticky. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm just kind of reminded about that. And we make these New Year's resolutions, and 9% of people or something actually keep them. Well, no wonder, because of the seductiveness of those Bondo, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a good reminder
Mm-hmm.
you're giving us that says, yes, make the vow,
Mm-hmm.
and then do the repentance and make the vow again.
Yes.
And don't give up on that, because,
Mm-hmm.
as you say, if it was easy,
Mm-hmm.
we'd come once and that'd be it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not the case.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important, because I think people will often have this attitude of like, they'll want to change something and they'll be successful for a few weeks or months, and then they fall off the wagon. And then this sort of attitude is just like, well, I failed,
Mhm.
like, oh well. I think that that's so common, that it's just like, well, I broke my streak, so what's the point of like starting over again? But that's really what practice is all about, of course, is because if it was that easy, or rather, like, if we didn't have some means of sort of reestablishing our vow, no one would ever get anywhere, because no one's ever kind of, it's very difficult to sort of get something right on the first try. I think going back to the rounds of defilement, if this is a wheel that's in motion, that's got a lot of momentum, it's, you can't just stop it right away. It's got to be sort of a gradual application of the brakes, If you can do it all at once, that's great, but like you shouldn't expect to do that. And furthermore, I think that an essential part of our practice is sort of self-acceptance and the acceptance of others, of course, too. It's sort of a nexus of self-improvement and self-acceptance, I think. That's kind of, I think, if we look at the early tradition, and we look at the figure of a Buddha, they seem sort of like a superhuman kind of being. But as the tradition progresses, I think there's this greater understanding that, we're sort of deeply corrupted in various ways, especially in the in the Pure Land tradition. And another important aspect is self-acceptance. So it's like what Suzuki Roshi said: you're fine just the way you are, and you could use a little work.
Good, thank you.
Yes.
I wondered if there was any relationship between the 108 defilements and the 108 gates of Dharma illumination. Pretty obvious,
Yeah.
like, pairing there.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I would expect, this defilement belongs with this gate and that, but is just in the Buddhist texts, it seems like there's a lot of symbolic numbers,
Mm-hmm.
like the 10,000 things.
Yeah.
So I sort of have a two-pronged question of like, is there a relationship between these two lists?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, or if so, is there some significance around the number 108?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as I can tell, there's no direct connection between the two lists. And in part, like I was saying, sort of the list of 108 defilements is sort of all over the place. There are different ways of making that list, it seems. There's no like kind of one accepted way. But similarly, the 108 gates of Dharma illumination is also like a list of lists, essentially. Like it includes a lot of sub-lists within it. But the number 108, for some reason, is sort of picked out in Indian traditions as having some kind of importance. I don't think it necessarily has any special meaning other than indicating a lot, but also just maybe being sort of an aesthetically pleasing kind of number in the Indian tradition, I think. Like in the same way that we kind of like 7 and 12 and don't like 13, like these things maybe don't have a very clear reason, but somehow they're culturally...
I think there's something about multiples.
Mm.
I think 108 is a multiple of something, and I should know, and probably other people here remember. I think there's something about that multiple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're right, the number shows up all the time, like 84,000 Dharma
Yeah,
gates.
right.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's a significant number, but it doesn't actually necessarily mean 108 discrete things.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Um,
Although, Doju was threatening to do a whole series of talks on the 108 defilements. Who's going to follow that? If I get down to the end of the 108 gates, who's going to start up with 108 defilements? I thought that would actually be really useful.
yeah, maybe.
it's not an indication that he personally carries all 108.
Oh, I'm sure I do.
You'll have to
Sure, we
call
all
in some
do.
expertise from others on that.
I don't know about voluptuousness. So. Other kind of thoughts?
Just kind of a comment. I think what stands out in my practice, in our practice, is that we have to get out of our way so we see the opportunities to improve places. And it just occurred to me that with your friend, you were taking an opportunity to help somehow, And I'm thinking about my wife. Recently, we've had a lot of conversations about how miserable she is around the state of the world, And I'm saying, stop watching the news, things like that. So it's, I guess, fundamental to practice that we are getting beyond our own confusion and able to notice the opportunities.
Yes, yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it can be tricky, of course, helping others because there's a complex dynamic of sort of like judging the other. Like, am I judging them by recognizing that there's something lacking there, or like who am I to be like telling them something when I might have the same issue myself, and like when is the right time? Like how do you be helpful and not more of a hindrance? So all of these things make it pretty tricky, but I think recognizing when the moment comes up can be helpful. So rather than you don't want to be like just critical of someone, like they do something and be like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Obviously that's not going to be well received. But if someone is kind of bringing something to you, that's usually I think a good time to listen first, and then gently kind of try to, I think, make some suggestions. And it's also I find helpful for me as the person, like trying to be helpful, because sometimes I do recognize, I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I know what the solution is, but like I'm not doing it either, and I probably should, and maybe it becomes a thing of, hey, let's work on this together, like I come to think of it, that's something I could improve on. So, those little instances of skillful means, I think, are really important. We have to be gentle. So, Sawyer?
Yeah, I'm several times in your talk, it seemed sort of like the affliction or defilement of doubt felt, pretty fundamental in a lot of ways, and I guess specifically referring to some part of us doubting that the teachings are effective or going to be wholesome, or and maybe I'm seeing that in myself a little bit. I'm seeing like what sometimes has come up for me is feeling like sort of the way that we approach practice in contemporary times is like so different from the context in which Dogen was practicing, or what the Buddha was doing with his Sangha, and all of us are sort of out in the world dealing with complex situations in a way that seems to make it a lot harder to settle into these teachings. And so, but then if I think of that in terms of, that's actually sort of just a doubt that the teachings just are the way things are. That's kind of helpful. And I think it also kind of connects to the idea of mappo, that, because sometimes I've thought, well, we're like just in mega Mapo. It's like that much harder for us because there's no like infrastructure for people to practice. And, so yeah, I don't know. This, I guess, just an offering of
Discernment.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that, so for those who might not know that term, Mappo it refers to the age of the final Dharma, which in some systems it's sort of thought that the time that the Buddha was around and for several centuries afterwards, people could attain awakening, kind of understand the teachings and practice. And then there's the semblance Dharma where people can still practice and hear the teachings, but they can't attain awakening anymore. And then the age of the final Dharma is like, I guess, the teachings are still there, but like people can't really practice, and there's no awakening. Dogen sort of rejects this idea in a way, and while still kind of using it when convenient, I guess we could say. And so yeah, sometimes it can feel like that now, like, you know, when we compare ourselves to the Buddha's Sangha or Dogen, we could say like, oh, we're not even really practicing, you know, like that was what real practice was. This is just semblance of what that was. But it's interesting to see that Dogen, of course, does that too. Like, you know, he is always comparing himself to the Buddha Sangha and comparing practice in China and Japan to India, you know, and he's always kind of like, oh, like back in India, everything was great, you know, like, but in China, like, they don't know what they're doing, and even less in Japan, you know. So, you know, that's kind of the age-old thing, maybe, of, you know, older people criticizing the younger generation. But I think, you know, I was telling you the other day, I've been reading this book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, which Hoko, your student, Kyoku, recommended to me.
Oh, good.
Which is a really interesting book. And one of the things that she talks about is how we in the 18th and 19th centuries have set up this idea of progress that, and it's interesting too, because I think this dovetails with Uchiyama Roshi's teaching, because of course he talks about balancing progress and practice. But the idea being is we're always like moving forward, right? Technology is progressing, and things are getting better over time. You know, that's kind of like the default assumption of the past couple centuries. But I think now we're sort of realizing that, you know, things aren't really going as planned. You know, like maybe this thing that we thought was progress actually is not progress. But we still have that kind of paradigm somehow. Like we still expect progress, but we haven't. But not only is it sort of like not really happening, but we still have the expectation, and that creates this frustration, right? That like it should be progressing, but it's not. But it's interesting if you look back, you know, before modern times, you know, people didn't have this idea of like progress. Things were the way that they were, and they had always been like that. That was the way that people approached the world. And I think that, you know, I'm not saying that, like, you know, I think some new paradigm will emerge over time. But I think being fixated on the world going in a certain direction is a hindrance, I think. And it's one that I think all of us grapple with, because we want the world to be a certain way, and we see that it's not that way, and we suffer as a result. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't work to bring about that world. We absolutely should. But in the same way that Dogen says that a hindrance can become a hindrance, like, you know, trying to eliminate a hindrance can become a hindrance. I think that this is a perfect example. You know, we need to find a way to have equanimity within the world as it is, because even if we do play even a big role in doing something that changes the world, we can't do it by ourselves. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. We have to live with this world as it is. So finding a way to get that equanimity, not getting attached to every political thing that happens, I think is really important for practice in our time. So And I think that practice and politics get mixed up in a way that is not necessarily always helpful. So I think keeping that in mind can be helpful and is important. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but those are my thoughts. Anyone online before we wrap up? Nope. Yes, it will. Mm-hmm.
Sort of a question. An animetic question. I'm curious in your readings of Dogen if he demonstrates any defilements. And also, is my very question a defilement?
That's interesting. So is your question a defilement? I don't think so, although I don't really know what's motivating it exactly, so I think that's for you to decide.
If you're asking her to show him up, then yes.
Does Dogen have defilements? I would say, yeah, probably. Like, I think you can see some of them in his writing. Like, he seems to be angry at times. You know, and yeah, I mean, I think like I was mentioning, he sort of tends to have these diatribes sometimes where he's very harshly critical of people, and you know, I think that can be instructive, of course, and perhaps it's possible to like express that kind of anger without really like feeling it. Maybe, I don't know. But I think, you know, it might give other people license to think that, you know, expressing anger is okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are small things that we could maybe find in his writings that indicate that he's human, you know. And I think that that's probably a good thing, you know. If people are too perfect, then it's kind of hard to see yourself in them, you know, and what they're doing. So yeah.
Jesus angry.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Saintly man, son of God, you know, in the temple.
Yeah.
Got angry at the merchant.
He kind of got angry a lot, actually. Like, I remember that, like, after I started practicing Buddhism, I was, like, reading the New Testament, and that was, like, kind of my initial reaction. I was like, oh, he gets angry a lot. The Buddha never really got angry very much, I don't think. Most, yeah, well, I mean, yeah, as presented. So, yeah, and I think that that's important to recognize, is that we're not trying to be, I mean, maybe we're aiming off at this superhuman ideal, but we have to recognize that we're never going to get there, and we shouldn't expect anyone else to. So.
Shall we finish?
Sure.